opinion written by conservative Justice Samuel Alito calling for Roe v. Wade to be overturned was leaked. What's Roe v. Wade? Roe v. Wade was a landmark decision of the Supreme Court in 1973 in which they ruled that the Constitution of the United States protects a pregnant woman's liberty to choose to have an abortion without excessive government restriction. And now, after decades of precedent, we will likely lose this right. If Roe v. Wade is officially overturned this summer when it's brought for a ruling before the Supreme Court, then the decision on whether abortion is legalized will be up to each state. And up to 26 state governments could make having an abortion in their state illegal. Women across this country, of all walks of life, of all colors, and of all political backgrounds, are about to face regulation over their bodies, their family planning, and their economics in a crazy way. When I saw this news, I freaked out, and I had a ton of questions. Could women die because of this decision? What will happen to poor women who are forced to have a baby? Will exceptions be made for rape and incest? How does this make us look abroad? Are women even equal if they don't have the right to choose? How can I help? So I wanted to talk to the ultimate geek on women's health, a true badass, Dr. Shiva Gofrani. If you haven't seen her videos on Instagram, go there immediately, because she's absolutely fabulous. She's at Big Love Fierce Juju, which when you see our interview, you'll see is such an accurate way to describe her. She's been a practicing OBGYN since 1999, and through her videos and her platform, Tribe Called V, she seeks to empower people about women's health wellness through education. Hi, Shiva. I'm so lucky to have you. Thank you for being my Geek of the Month at this very fortuitous time.
Thank you, Hagar. I love it. I also love being called the geek because there's certain things that I'm uber geeky about, which I won't list here because some of them are, anatomical things that I love to talk about. So thank you.
The pleasure is mine. The Geeks of the Month are for the change makers out there. And you are out there on an almost daily basis, teaching people, educating people on women's reproductive rights, on women's reproduction in general, and all the aspects of it. And I love how you talk about it just so open, and that you teach the world why we should understand these things. So you're the ultimate geek, and I'm the one who's lucky to have you. But especially now with what's going on with this draft opinion that came from the Supreme Court on Roe v. Wade, and the likelihood that Roe v. Wade will be overturned in a matter of months. We're here to have all your opinion on it and all your information and gain from your wisdom. Can you start off by just explaining super simply, why is abortion such an important right?
It's so interesting because, there's so many different angles that we can approach this at, one of which is just our right to bodily autonomy. Now, my concern with using that argument only is, first of all, that eliminates the whole notion of whether or not the cells at the beginning are the potential for life, are they life or not? So there's that one aspect. Secondly, now with the entire pandemic, we've gotten into this whole my body, my choice. What if I don't want a vaccine? What if I don't want to wear a mask? Now, I would argue those are totally different topics than abortion because those are very clear public health topics, but you can see how they get conflated on both sides, right? If I'm saying my body, my choice, then that other person can say, well, I don't want to wear a mask and I don't want to vaccinate. Whereas if they're saying I don't want to vaccinate, then why do they have the right to tell me that I can't have an abortion? So it goes both ways. And yet I still think the side that sides for, yes, you should wear a mask and vaccinate for public health reasons. And yes, I should be able to choose what goes on in my body are all very appropriate. So from the right perspective, our body's rights, of course, you should have the right to bodily autonomy. But the other part is really valuable as well to understand that abortion for many people, even people who are pro-choice, they look at it just as, well, if I get pregnant and I choose not to have the baby, I need an abortion, but that's not really me because I'm going to use birth control and I'm educated and all those things. That's not even the important point though, because abortion itself is a life-saving healthcare procedure that we all need to really understand. Yes, there are elective abortions where someone forgot to use birth control, didn't use birth control, and doesn't want a child, which, by the way, they still should be able to have, no questions asked. That is their right. But there are millions of examples outside of even the egregious rape, incest, or anomalies. There are millions of times where birth control failures occur, or the systemic issues that we know exist every day where you just don't have access to birth control. Even educated women don't always have access because they go to work. It's hard to get to their doctor. As we know, healthcare is broken. So there's all of these aspects. And then the very real fact that getting pregnant is a potentially dangerous ordeal. So when you have an abortion, you are potentially stopping yourself from having blood clot, preeclampsia, postpartum hemorrhage, a lot of things that can happen during pregnancy. Pregnancy is not something to be taken lightly. So to force someone to continue with a pregnancy when they really either don't want it or it can be detrimental to their health, again, it's just basic healthcare. And I really think that that's what we need to keep reminding people so they don't just think, oh, it's just those young women who didn't use birth control and they want to have an abortion. That's the way I think many people think about it, even if they are pro-choice.
I'd love if you can elaborate on that a little bit more, because One of the things I think that gets lost in the public discourse across the country is the question of the public health safety issue angle to this, the
Yeah.
threat that overturning Roe v. Wade could pose to women.
Oh, yes.
As an OBGYN, what are your top concerns? We need, if there's a message, if you had a loudspeaker that you could tell across the country, that you could shout, this is what we could start seeing.
Right.
What could that be? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, I can. And actually, I'm going to say two things. One, I'll elaborate in a minute, but the one thing I actually want to address that you had touched upon, you opened with, oh, you're out there educating, which is true. I am an OBGYN, which means by definition, as a physician, first, do no harm. Second, as a physician, we love life. And third, as an obstetrician, my job is to daily bring life into the world. And I love it. And if you ask most doctors, most OBGYNs who are vehemently pro-choice, and this is what I said yesterday at a rally where I spoke, we, and those of us who are pro-choice in general, are the true purveyors of life, right? We want women and people with uteruses to truly live their life in its fullest. We want to educate them about sex so that they understand how to say yes or no with their own will. We want to educate them about contraception, and we want them to have access to it through the government and through insurance companies, which right now they don't have great access to it. And it's really a lie to say people can get it for free. Medicaid covers everything. Medicaid covers a certain number of birth controls. They don't cover all of them. It's not always easy to get. There are side effects. So I think it's really important to remember we are the purveyors of life. We want education, we want contraception, and yet we realize that those are not foolproof. So we still want to support women, either if they merely choose to have an abortion because their birth control didn't work, or because they weren't yet educated on birth control, or when they have, again, birth defects, or they have other things. And now getting to the question you asked, we used to only have to worry about Roe v. Wade with regard to, again, a termination because you decided you want an abortion, or an abortion because you had rape, incest, bodily harm to the woman, like the woman was in danger, or if there was an anomaly. Now, there are more important rights that every single woman on earth has to worry about, because contraception and things like ectopic pregnancies. So contraception is getting to be the point where many of these states in their trigger laws want to stop IUDs, intrauterine device, which is that little T-shaped device that goes into your uterus that is meant for birth control, but also can actually help with heavy, painful periods and non-contraceptive benefits. But they want to stop it because there is that question about whether or not an IUD will stop a fertilized embryo from implanting into the uterus, like all kinds of things that are absurd. They want to stop Plan B, which is consistently called the morning after pill, meaning you are not yet pregnant, but you've had sex, and you want to stop the ability of that egg to actually create a pregnancy. They want to stop that. And that will be enacted with the trigger laws if June passes. And they want to consider any live embryo. So the minute it's even a 2 or 3 cell stage where it's the embryo. So let's say you have an ectopic pregnancy, which is a pregnancy in the tube, where occasionally there will be a heartbeat in the tube. It is impossible for a woman to carry a pregnancy to term if it's in her tube. The tube is tiny, the tube will rupture, and at best she'll have debilitating pain and the hemorrhage will be controlled, right?
That's
and at worst, she will die. And this has happened and does happen all the time in other countries, and certainly even in our country if an ectopic is not addressed quickly enough. And then third, if any woman, let's say even the most anti-choice Catholic of women, gets pregnant with a miscarriage, and let's say there's still a heartbeat, because you can have an incomplete miscarriage, what's termed an incomplete abortion, meaning it's aborting on its own, but the pregnancy is still in there with a heartbeat. She's hemorrhaging. The only way to save her life is to do a life-saving procedure, which is the same thing as an abortion, but it's a DNC, dilation and curettage, where we scrape the lining and remove everything. She might not be able to get that. And she certainly wouldn't have time to travel from Texas to one of the states that allows for it. And then the last thing on the table is IVF. So in vitro fertilization, where we create embryos, again, men and women of all walks of life, all colors, creeds, socioeconomic status, religions might need to use IVF in order to grow their family, something that OBGYNs help with to create life. They might also then need to make decisions about whether or not they need to use every embryo, because they'll often have anywhere from 3 to 15 embryos that they might not want to use. And they might be forced to do things with those embryos, like give them up for adoption or utilize those embryos, because you will not be able to abort that embryo. So there are little things like this that really, this slippery slope is going fast, and we really need to worry about those. So I think for the populace of women and men who are pro-choice, who do already believe that abortions should be legal, I applaud you, but you have to start also learning about all these other ramifications so that we really rally the base and get people to understand what is at stake for us.
I mean, you just blew my mind with
Yeah.
all of this, by the way, but the IVF one, I've just never really thought of it that way. I mean,
No.
that's
Yes.
what a decision like that and the ramification like that. So the thing that, as someone who works in international affairs and looks at things from the international perspective, the thing that I found fascinating with what's happening and terrifying and heartbreaking is that, so this was front page news around the world. Every country, the front page was what was happening here regarding Roe v. Wade. And I believe the reason for that is that for the United States, we are a country that pushes civil rights, civil liberties, democracy, human rights around the world. And to have our justices lie to our faces and walk back a major right like this, something that's been precedent for decades,
Right.
it really makes us look like hypocrites. And so but I'd like your perspective on this.
Yeah.
What are the ramifications you see on that front, or just internationally, and how we may look, or as a doctor, things that you may fight for abroad that may be more difficult because of what's happening?
I mean, I think that the fact is that in the last, let's say, 6 to 7 years, our country has not fared well when you look at us from abroad, right? I think many people, and you like me, I suspect, because I'm a Persian American, which means by definition, I have family members in almost every country in the world. And they consistently, of course they love America. Guess what? For things like shopping, they love America. For things like Disney World. But many of them would say, we would never live in America. Why would we live there? I was just with Australian cousins who are consistently shocked at what has happened in our country over the last 6 to 7 years. They think that COVID was treated really badly. I mean, really seeing so many people in an educated populace where we had access to vaccines, but we had to fight about vaccines for something that was purely political, not scientific. And now Roe v. Wade. So I think it's humiliating. I mean, I think it really, unfortunately, fares poorly. I mean, we look uneducated, and we look like hypocrites, and we look like we don't really care about life. Because if we truly cared about life, there is no way we would do this. We would say, and something else I would love for us to point out is, if we were truly talking about life, then what we would say is, we all love life. Humanity wants to love life. So let's really look to how we can grow life in a beautiful, healthy way. We can educate women. We can give them contraception. We can agree that abortion has to exist, ideally only for those things that we can't control, because the other things we can try to control. We can try to improve the ability to get educated and get contraception. If both sides agree, then we would all be supporters of life. But instead, you and I both know this is not about life. This is not about the embryo. It is purely about control. And it's really about controlling women's bodies. The irony being that in the news the last couple of days has also been that Afghanistan is enforcing burqas, right? So the fact that Roe v. Wade is going to be overturned and women are going to be forced to birth babies or to die if they have ectopic pregnancies, miscarriages, things like that, at the same time that we are so critical of Afghanistan for burqas. I mean, it's actually absurd. When I talk about it more, I get even more angry, and I cannot believe it. Really.
No, but I mean, you've underscored why this matters so much, why this is something that everybody has to care about, and that everybody has to get angry about.
Yes.
And so leading to that, what can we do for those of us who want to do something? First, tell us about your mission and your brand at Tribe Called Bee. And then also tell us if we want to donate, if we want to be an activist. I mean, how can we make change? How can we have an effect to help for the better?
Okay. I love all those questions. Okay. I'm going to try to do this rapid fire.
It's a lot in one.
Okay. One, I also want to really highlight for anyone who doesn't know it, making abortions illegal is not going to stop abortions. Study after study after study has shown that. It's not, just like we know prohibition didn't stop people from drinking alcohol. So the only thing that is going to decrease abortions and decrease unintended pregnancies is increased education and increased contraception. So I don't care what religion you are, you have to appreciate that and understand that, because if you really care about life, then you would understand that abortion is something necessary to a degree, but we can minimize it. And we want to work towards that as the pro-choice movement. So that's one. Two, I really urge every single pro-choice human to never use the term pro-life. And every time you hear someone use the term pro-life, you supplant it and you correct it with anti-choice, because they are not pro-life. And we know how PR works. We know that they are rallying their base and they're acting as if it's about life. And it's not. It is merely about being anti-choice. And I think it's really important that we keep highlighting that. So I'm going to over and over and over correct anyone when they say pro-life. I'm going to say, oh, you mean anti-choice, right? Third, I'll talk about Tribe Called V before we talk about what can everyone do. So Tribe Called V is, I'm the co-founder of Tribe Called V, tribecalledv.com, with my business partner, Jenny Hayes Edwards, because she had a baby at a later age in life. And we decided that we wanted to collaborate and really create an online platform where we could do all the OBGYN teaching. So a lot about pregnancy and a lot about gynecology. So I think now this is more apropos than ever, because women and people with ovaries really need to learn about birth control and contraception. This week on Instagram, I'm going to really try to push hard about and encouraging people to understand contraception, because you cannot take anything for granted. You have to know all of your rights. You have to know what are the different choices of birth control. You have to know the side effects. You have to know the pros, cons, and what you can pivot to. And you have to know how you can get these things, because you're going to be in certain states where you will not have access to things like an intrauterine device. It is absurd. So tribecalledv.com, because we're going to educate, and we try to do it in a way that really makes it fun and engaging, and really reduces the material to something you can really understand, but not in a way that's too simplistic, because you need to know the details, and we want to decrease anxiety. And then last but not least, like, what can we do? So first of all, you need to vote. Everyone needs to get out there and vote, and they need to vote in like local elections, because it's these local elections, the Congress people who are really going to potentially affect change, then the governors and senators, everything. So you need to vote. And unfortunately, we all need to donate money. So we need to donate money. I would always advocate for Planned Parenthood. Emily'sList.org, Act Blue is a great one. So those are the three kind of most famous ones. I can also send you an attachment with a big list if people want to become more granular and really donate to. There are tons of companies that will donate money towards people of color who can't have access, because we have to remember, people who are going to be most disproportionately or most aggressively affected by this are those who can't leave work easily, don't have access to their own car, things like that. And then as far as information, Guttmacher Institute is an excellent website for very good information that's very accurate, and it talks about historical perspective and current data. So I really like that particular website.
This is so helpful. And you made a point that I think is really important here, that not only does this feel like an attack on women, it's a real attack on poor women.
Oh, yeah,
Because
absolutely.
they're going to be so disproportionately affected.
Yeah.
And it's a responsibility that I really hope Americans across the country appreciate.
Well, but one thing I would love to point out really quickly about that point. So I think that there's no doubt that we know that, listen, poor, underprivileged, and women of color in America fare worse, no matter what, across every board, right? We know that in everything. They are going to be hurt the most by this. But the problem is that I think that as, wealthy white women who are educated, it's very easy to kind of have compassion and empathy and say, oh, we're going to give dollars and we're going to think about it. We're even going to rally. But somehow in the back of your mind, you think, no, it's not, but that I could still get my abortion. I can still make sure my daughter's taken care of. And here's the truth. That might no longer be true. And even if you could get her abortion electively because you can travel to a state because you have the means to do so, let's say she's going to college in a southern state and she gets pregnant by surprise and has an ectopic. Let's say she needs birth control. She can't fly home every time she needs her birth control. So there are a lot of very clear ramifications. And this is something that came up when I was speaking to an elderly individual yesterday who was a wonderful liberal man. And he said, we've been through this before. And I had to correct him and say, no, this is different. They keep lowering the level of viability of what they're considering viability, which is an entirely nebulous word to begin with, because it doesn't mean that the embryo can live outside of the body. But because they keep lowering the level as to when you can have a termination, they're going to be able to really create laws that are going to affect, again, miscarriages, ectopic pregnancies, things that we've never seen. This is not like the 70s. So we really need educated women to not only feel empathy and donate and educate and talk about it, we need them to feel a little bit of like, holy wow, this is really potentially going to affect me and my family, because I think that's how they're going to affect change even better.
Well, Shiva, thank you so much for this. This is so insightful, so helpful. You've blown my mind. I'm sure the minds of every viewer out there. And thank you for the list of where we can help, how we can donate. It's so valuable, and I know everybody's looking for it. So thank you, and thank you for your work.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing everything out. I appreciate it.
I told you she's amazing. She's brilliant and fabulous and fun, and she talks as fast as me, which is pretty hard to beat. Follow Dr. Gofrani on Instagram at BigLoveFierceJuju, and also check out her educational platform, tribecalledv.com, for more.